In last week's episode, I talked about political art and the limitations thereof. And it's possible that I was a little bit too hard on Netflix's The Chef's Table. But honestly, I don't think so. I think that performative wokeness is going to be a truly pernicious force in advertising for years to come, and we gotta stay on top of it.
Which reminds me, not that you need to be told this, but never, ever congratulate or thank a corporation on social media. Don't do it. I don't care if they pull their advertising from Sean Hannity and then leave a horse head in his bed. Don't thank them. Thank the employee who killed Sean Hannity's horse, of course. But I don't want to see you out there like, bravo at Bounty Paper Towels, clapping emoji, clapping emoji, clapping emoji. Don't do it. Not even in your minds. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about a piece of political work, an activist documentary that's currently in development. We're going to talk to its producer, Peter Francese, one of the foremost demographics experts in the nation. The founder of Demographics magazine, in fact. That's the level of expert we're talking about here. Pencils up. Peter sees some very dire demographic trends that he believes will doom the state in which he and I both live, good old New Hampshire. To put it simply, we're getting old too fast, and there's some structural and institutional reasons this is happening. It's not just, time. Peter's documentary is meant to warn our local communities and persuade them to right the ship. But here's the thing. It's his second documentary on the subject, and he doesn't even think it will work.
This is the first project I've ever done, the sequel project, that I am extremely ambivalent about, because I simply don't know whether or not we're going to change anybody's mind. I'm full of raging ambivalence because I can't convince myself that this new project will in fact create the aha moment in people, and they will say, it's time for a change.
Having the spooky organ music on hand is really helpful after a clip like that, right? We're also going to talk to Elena Piekut, an assistant city planner from the only growing region in New Hampshire, Strafford County, a middle-aged island in a graying ocean. We're going to talk about what seems to be working and whether or not it's anything that people are doing on purpose. And here's the thing about today's episode. Although it addresses a very specific problem, it's not just for New Hampshireites. Even if you don't live anywhere near here, if you're listening to this in Kiev, or Philly, or in the shadow of Six Flags somewhere in California, or wherever Olivia said they live, I want you to know that these demographic shifts are coming for you, too.
So, okay, that part's not really true. Sorry. I kind of got carried away pretending to be Sarah Koenig for a second there. This problem is, in fact, exclusive to New Hampshire. However, there is still a benefit to you learning about it anyway. I promise. You'll see.
Welcome to the last podcast. I'm your host, Zac Little. I forget to say that sometimes. I've been trying to do it more. It's still me. I'm still here. And I love doing this show, and thank you for listening. Today's episode is kind of a sequel to An Improved System. This one is about systemic understanding.
Most people go about their business, their work, their home life, their children. They don't really pay any attention to what's going on in their town, in the county, in the state. I've been trying for quite a number of years to make people aware of what is in fact going on in their community that has an impact on their lives and an impact on their livelihood. And an impact on their property, because their property values depend on how well the community is doing. if the community is doing well and has good schools and employment, then everything's fine. But if the community doesn't, support its public schools and doesn't support its neighborhoods and parks and whatnot, then the local residents feel it economically and otherwise.
So this is Peter Francese. He founded a magazine called American Demographics in 1979, and, it was a hit. The magazine was eventually purchased by the Dow Jones Company and later absorbed by another publication, Ad Age, which still actually publishes a bi-monthly print edition, which is a modern miracle. Along the way, he wrote a couple of books which pretty much tell his story in title alone. You got 1991's Capturing Customers, which is about marketing, not kidnapping. 1996's self-explanatory Marketing Know-How. 1998's even more self-explanatory Marketing Insights to Help Your Business Grow. And then, in 2008, he co-authored Communities and Consequences, which had an accompanying documentary of the same title. That's a big thematic shift. He went from talking about how demographic trends could help your business grow to warning about how they were going to destroy it. From marketing master to demographic doomsayer in 4 books. Sorry, I get very alliteration happy when I'm narrating.
And in the state of New Hampshire, the number one problem is that the population as a whole is aging very, very rapidly.
Yeah, so at the time of your original book, New Hampshire was 6th or 8th oldest?
Sixth
oldest.
Sixth oldest state in the nation.
And now we're number 2.
That's right.
We're gunning for the top slot, Maine.
Well, exactly. Maine's has had the top slot for quite a long time.
Yeah.
The nation as a whole ages very slowly. The median age of the nation ages very slowly. So since the last census in 2010, it's edged up 0.8 of a year. It's not very much. I think the median age of the United States is about 38. But the median age of New Hampshire jumped 2 years just in that 7. Mm-hmm. And so what that meant was that in a number of the counties, in fact in the majority of the counties in the state, there are more deaths than births. When there are more deaths than births, that's called negative natural increase. And it ages the population very rapidly because it means that there are very few children being born and lots of people are very elderly and are passing away.
Out of curiosity, I looked up the median age in other countries. Niger in Africa, it has the world's lowest median age, which is 15.4. That's of course due to lower life expectancy, but still, I'm imagining a nation just overrun with teens. I bet they have great memes in Niger. The highest median age is Monaco at 52 years. I bet Facebook is horrible over there. But, 3 people live in Monaco. It's basically a castle that accidentally counts as a country. So maybe it's more instructive to look at the countries that are closest to the US in the rankings. Peter was right, by the way, even though he was just quoting off the top of his head. 38.1 years. That's us. Countries like New Zealand, Australia, and Russia are right there with us in the 38s and 37s. So is China, which is surprising, although I'm not sure why it was surprising. What is the most desirable median age for a country anyway? Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that it's my age, 31.9 years. Who do we got? French Polynesia and Antigua. Those guys are doing something right. Honestly, I was just joking that my age is the ideal median age, but it actually might be. All the countries at the bottom of the list are in persistent decline. Japan, Germany, Italy. When you travel to the top of the list, trending younger, you go from Central America to the Middle East to Africa, areas that are beset with disease and poverty and state-sanctioned violence. I mean, I'm just looking at numbers and wildly speculating and assuming here, but that's what the Freakonomics guys do, and they're famous.
And now I know that you hear a lot of the same things about people, millennials putting off giving birth, that sort of thing. Is it possible that every single millennial will turn 37 and have 2 babies?
Possible, but very, very unlikely.
Yeah.
Demographic trends move with glacial speed. I mean, they move very slowly, and the situation with millennials is really pretty obvious if anybody just wants to look at that. If you compare millennials to baby boomers, mm-hmm. which is what everybody does, of course.
Right.
There are roughly 78 million baby boomers left. There were 80 plus million to start with, and they've been dying at the rate of a substantial rate, 10,000 a day, I think. There are 90 million millennials. So there are a lot more millennials than there are baby boomers. But millennials have three characteristics which make them totally different from baby boomers. First of all, are much more diverse, whereas the baby boomers were not very diverse at all. The vast majority of them were white non-Hispanics, like you and I are. I presume you are, as well, and that changes their attitudes in some fashion. It also changes their income. White non-Hispanics traditionally in the United States have the highest income of any ethnic racial group, whereas millennials, almost half of them, a little under half, I think it's 40-some%, are either Hispanic, African American, or Asian. And so that they have less total income than the baby boomers would have had at that time. The second very important difference is that they're carrying, as a group, about $1.5 trillion of education debt. They're paying $300-400, sometimes even more than that, per month to pay off that student loan. And the way those student loans are structured, they're essentially a mortgage. It takes 30 years to pay it off at the rate that they're asking you to pay it off, with interest up front. So essentially, there are millions and millions of millennials that have a mortgage and no house.
I stopped for a minute to contemplate why it was that college debt was the only one you couldn't escape, and realized the answer pretty much immediately. They can take away your house, they can take away your car, your fancy stereo, your arcade games. Sorry, I'm thinking of every sitcom ever where a character gets carried away with a credit card. They can take away your stuff, is the point. But they can't take away your mind. I don't know if that's inspiring or really dark.
So the participation in the economy through purchasing of a home and a car and things like that, marriage and children, which all take assets and income, are really not in the cards for most millennials. The third thing that is really a serious difference and a serious problem for millennials is that they're coming of age right after the greatest recession since the Great Depression. The recession, the horrible recession of 2008 and 9 and into 10 and 11 crippled their ability to start a career, to start a family, to start making money. And many of them are living on an income that is essentially the same, for all intents and purposes, as it was 10 years ago. So I think that it is unfair of us to ask millennials to, do what baby boomers did: buy a house, buy a car, to get married, have children. It's a different time, and millennials are much less willing to take the economic risks that are associated with that sort of thing than baby boomers were, because their income is more problematic.
So if you happen to be a childless millennial listening to this episode, don't worry, you're off the hook. The way out of this is not you having 3 babies right now. The problem isn't necessarily that our birth rate is declining, but rather that New Hampshire is graying disproportionately to the rest of the country. People are having kids, obviously, but when they do, they aren't settling in New Hampshire. A lot of them move away. We're going to listen a little bit to a scene from Communities and Consequences. This is a town meeting in Marlborough, New Hampshire.
But everybody has needs, and I would hope that a community would come together and meet the needs of any family. I think we should attract people to this town who want to be here, who want to live here for a long time, who want to raise their children here and invest in a community.
It is okay to vote the new school down. Vote no.
Town meeting is a kind of purposely anachronistic form of local government practiced in some parts of New Hampshire.
Growth is not growth. There are donor households and receiver households. A receiver household is one that has more services than it pays for in its taxes. A donor household is one that pays more taxes than it receives in services. For education, because it's so expensive, and what I'm about to say is not anti-child or anti-education by any means, it's realistic. If we attract households with children, that will require heavy subsidy.
There it is, you've all just heard it.
He doesn't want children in this town because they're too expensive.
I don't want any personal attacks.
I'm just reiterating, moderator.
I don't want it.
Citizens of the town are speaking about the possibility of a new school, which will be voted on right there in the room minutes later.
It is a very difficult decision when you're faced with a tight budget, and I understand that. If you think the renovation is going to save you money, or if closing this school and shipping the kids out for tuition to Keene is going to save you money in the long run, you're honestly just kidding yourself.
15 people spoke in favor of the school, 2 against it. But in the end, as before, a significant portion of the residents attending the town meeting listened, sat silently, and then cast their ballot no.
People voted no basically because they don't want their taxes to go up. And when you build a new school, not only does that cost money, and by the way, in New Hampshire, we don't have a sales or income tax, so you're mostly talking about property taxes for funding. Not only does it cost money, but it also potentially attracts more young families to the area, and more children equals even more money. Okay, so there are some reasons why that part's not actually true that we'll get into later, but for now, just for the sake of argument, let's pretend that it is. I have to say, it kind of blew my mind that people would be against essentially new life, against the concept of renewal. Some of these people never had kids, but a lot of them have grown children, which is part of why they see no need for a new school. You hear people talk about how America has a me-first mentality, but in a lot of cases it's like, me first and then please close and lock the door behind me. And if you think that's overstating things, several of the families in Peter's documentary talk about feeling unwelcome in their community, and at least one family moves away in the immediate aftermath of the school vote.
Well, this is the closest we've ever been to listing our house. We still haven't officially listed it. We showed it. If we stop having a school, it will be a community of retirees, which, again, that's valid if that's what the town wants to become, but it's not going to become a vibrant community. It's a retirement community in that case.
Why did this happen in Marlborough? It happened in part because too many voters viewed a brand new school as an attractant to families with children. And over the past 10, 15 years, families with children have gone from being viewed as a precious community resource essential to the future to being a financial burden that many voters feel they can't afford. The problem with this is that it sends a message to the young people, to the young families, that they're no longer welcome in New Hampshire.
Okay, so the school system itself is not entirely blameless in all of this. We're going to go down a very specific rabbit hole for a second, but I promise there's a good reason for it.
I don't think it's entirely the fault of, people my age and basically older people who don't have any children. Only 1 out of 5 households have any children in them at all. Mm-hmm. And so, 4 out of 5 households in New Hampshire, there are no children anywhere. And so they have no direct connection to the public school systems. And yet the public school systems, and there are over 100 of them in the state, are very expensive to run. And because there's so many.
New Hampshire has 167 school districts and 188,000 students. That's 1,125 kids per district. I was checking my notes there. I wasn't actually doing math. Not to keep Freakonomicsing you, but Massachusetts has 289 school districts and 954,000 students, so that's almost 3 times as many students per district. Now, there's a lot of reasons why it's unfair to compare those two figures, but just keep in mind that a school district has fixed administrative costs. You got to pay superintendent salaries. You got to pay for buildings. You got to pay for, clipboards. Fewer individual administrative units at least means fewer superintendent salaries, fewer rent payments on buildings, fewer clipboards. They're not cheap. And by the way, that's one reason that more kids in a district does not mean more cost to the taxpayer. Building 167 different systems cost the taxpayer a decent chunk of change, but adding 6 more kids named Braden to a 3rd grade class doesn't add up to much.
The problem that we have is a structural one, and that is we are either the only state or one of only a couple of states where the entire burden of paying for a local public education rests on the property tax owner of the town in which the schools are located.
So, okay, there's a town called Newington in New Hampshire that has a ton of businesses and very few residential areas. So their school district is rich. Meanwhile, there are districts up in northern New Hampshire where there's no businesses or just like one semi-retired guy who runs an auto body shop and does state inspections and oil changes. Those schools have a lot less money to go around.
The tendency is to say, do we really need this? And I can't blame people for wanting to think hard about another $100, $200 a year, even $300, $400 a year on their property taxes to pay for something that they personally will not benefit from.
Sure.
Now, the problem really is the miniaturization of our governments and the fact that each and every major expenditure by a school district has to be passed by a vote of the people in that town. And when you're the second oldest state in the nation and only 1 out of 5 households has any kid in it, that's a problem. The problem is made much worse by the state legislature, for some reason, back 10, 20 years ago, passed a law that said that when you approve a capital expenditure, like renovating a school, and it's above a trivial amount of money, it doesn't just take a majority of voters, it must pass by 60%, a super majority.
That school in Marlborough got more yes votes than no votes, by the way. Just not enough. So not only is there not much money to go around, it's not distributed evenly, and in order for the schools to get what they can of what they even have, they have to overcome voters' attitudes and misperceptions and hatred of children, and then they have to overcome, parliamentary procedure.
And it happens over and over and over again. And when that happens, it sends a message. It's a very clear message to people like you. We don't want you, particularly if you're going to bring kids and put them in our schools and cost me money.
When I was in high school, I remember there was this huge fight about my school district, potentially kicking out one of the towns in our district, New Durham, a poorer town. And the guy in the documentary sneering about donor families and receiver families reminded me of the tenor of that debate. There was a moment at our town meeting where the school superintendent made some kind of dismissive remark about students from New Durham, and the entire audience rose up at him in a fury. As a teenager who saw all local leaders as aspiring fascists, it was a really wonderful moment for me. Though I didn't, at the time, really grasp the systemic restrictions that were framing the issue. That's why I see this as a topic worthy of discussing on the podcast. By the way, as I've been learning about it, I've been starting to see the edges of the image. I've been putting a fuller picture together in my mind. And I think that understanding any system, being able to really look at it from above and get a sense of it, increases your ability to learn and understand other systems. Systemic understanding is like a language. Pick any topic, learn about the causes and effects and mitigating factors, see how they can be weighed against each other, then pick another topic. You're going to be able to find the levers a lot faster because now you know the basic sentence structure. You're becoming fluent in systems. That's what I'm trying to do, and that's why I wanted to talk about this stuff on the show today, and it's why I hope that you're listening no matter where you live. So, to somewhat glibly recap where we're at so far, as is the cut of my jib, voters in New Hampshire don't want higher property taxes. So they don't want new schools, they don't want families. Or at least some of them don't, and the system is set up to help those people. But that's just one branch of the problem. Lots of young people don't even want to have families right now. But they're not swelling New Hampshire's ranks and reducing its median age either because there's nowhere to live. A lot of the same attitudinal and structural biases that hurt schools also hurt affordable housing, which we can also very fairly call workforce housing.
Because it's those very young people who are a workforce. They are the people who will go to work in our factories and our stores and other offices and other establishments. And if we don't have workers here, the employers, after a while, they may raise wages a little bit to attract more people, but ultimately they say, hey, I'm out of here. I attended a Board of Zoning Appeals meeting in a town I won't mention, near here, about an hour from here. And it was a Board of Zoning Appeals meeting to grant a developer of 100 plus apartments, and they were affordable. One quarter of them would be affordable. And 1,000 people from that town signed a petition saying they don't want it. Okay, 1,000. The guy walked up and handed to the Board of Zoning Appeals a petition. He said there's 1,000 signatures in here. Now, those 1,000 people don't live anywhere near where that apartment building is supposed to go. There were no houses around it at all. There are no butters that objected. But they will find 50 reasons to deny that builder a permit.
Okay, so hostility toward schools, and by extension families, check. Hostility toward affordable housing, also check. Now, hostility toward people immigrating from other countries is not really something that's happening at the state level, but obviously it's happening at the national presidential level. And immigration from other countries supplies 52% of New Hampshire's population growth, such as it is. Obviously, none of that's helping anything. So, what's the doomsday scenario? If these trends continue and young people keep leaving or never showing up in the first place, and affordable housing continues to fail to materialize, what happens next? Well, I live about 10 minutes from Wentworth Douglas Hospital. It's a really great facility. I was born there. Much more recently, Arla was born there. Peter says he likes to ask older voters how they would feel if they went down to Wentworth Douglas for a routine test and got popped onto a shuttle bus down to Mass General. Or maybe had to get their blood drawn by a robot. I'm not sure which is the more grim prospect. It probably depends on the older voter. But either one is a possibility if Wentworth Douglas continues to experience staffing shortages. You could similarly scare young people into getting involved by pointing out that, as food service workers get pushed out of our communities, so do the restaurants. There's this local pizza chain, actually I guess I should say former pizza chain, called 900 Degrees. They closed down 2 locations in the area because they just couldn't hire anybody to work there. So you lose hospitals, you lose schools, you lose restaurants, and then what happens to your precious property values that you voted to protect? They don't go up. It reminds me a little bit of the Keep Portsmouth Loud campaign. So every summer we have this great concert series in the park downtown. They just announced Jenny Lewis is going to play there in June. This concert series has been repeatedly threatened by the rich people who own houses adjacent to the park. The degree to which they fail to understand that the concert series that brings people in, that provides revenue to local businesses and cultural excitement is the reason their shitty house is worth millions of dollars in the first place is insane to me. Who looks at a place like Portsmouth and goes, oh, that's going to be a wonderful place for me to retire to. As soon as I get there, I'll change everything about that wonderful place. But I digress. That little musical interlude came courtesy of friend of the show, Mackenzie Keefe. Check out his SoundCloud, I'll put a link in the show notes. And it's fitting that we just listened to Mackenzie because he's moving up here soon. I'm psyched that we're going to live closer to each other. And Peter Francese is psyched about it too. Or he would be if I told him and explained who Mackenzie was and everything. He's a young person coming up from Massachusetts, which is what Peter would be psyched about. In fact, Mackenzie, and me, and Christy, and Arlo, and Morgan, and Dave Murphy, most of the main characters of this show, we are all relatively new residents of Stratford County, the one region of New Hampshire that's showing signs of promise. It has a median age of 37 and it's trending even younger. So, what's happening? What is Stratford County doing right? If lots of people see and are persuaded by communities of consequences too, is there any behavior that their communities can replicate? Oh, I'm in such an old elevator right now. I went down to City Hall in Dover, New Hampshire, the county seat of Stratford County, which means, the team captain for the county. It's where the courthouse and the jails are, for instance. I went there to talk to Elena Piekut, an assistant city planner.
Have you ever lived in Dover or worked in Dover?
No. I live in Rollinsford now, so it's kind of like living...
I have at best a vague sense of what it means to be a city planner. Like on Parks and Recreation, Mark Brandanowitz was a city planner. And in one scene, one time, he was drawing a blueprint for a stop sign. So I knew she did that kind of thing. But what else?
So right before you got here, I was looking at a site plan for a new development. So a new building downtown that'll have, I think it's 3,000 plus square feet of commercial, and then 32 apartments above on 4 floors, I think. We're looking at it to see if it meets the regulations, basically. I never set out to become a planner. It just kind of happened, and we kind of found each other. But I have been thinking about it for a long time because I happened to get introduced to it at a young age.
Elena's dad was a crosswalk.
My hometown, when I was growing up, didn't have any zoning. And then in 1997, a couple of things started to happen that scared people. One was a proposed development of a racetrack, like a NASCAR racetrack, and another was a waste facility. And so without zoning, those things can just go in. Nobody reviews it. The town doesn't have any say in where they go. So the town ended up having this really dramatic shift in adopting zoning. And after that, my dad got involved and became a planning board member and then on the board of selectmen. And there was a nonprofit group that was founded around that time in the interest of protecting water quality in the area. And I was involved with that and did an internship with them. So I've kind of been thinking about this stuff since I was 10, which is not normal.
Okay, so when I think about zoning, I think about SimCity. You drag those little boxes out across some land and you build a nuclear plant there, you build some businesses over there, a roller coaster out here. Okay, it's possible I'm mixing up my 90s CD-ROM games.
And you're right. I mean, that's how you create parts of a town or city where this is where we want single-family homes, and that's what type of neighborhood this is going to be. This is where we're going to put the commercial development. This is where we're going to put factories. This is where we want apartment buildings, that kind of thing. But it can get quite nuanced. For example, Dover has, I think, 19 different zoning districts. So each of those are unique. And then we have overlay districts and other complications and stuff.
So obviously, there's a taco district and there's a pizza district, and in the overlay area between the two is where you go to the combination Pizza Hut and Taco Bell. And that is what zoning is all about.
And then zoning also controls dimensional concerns. So that's where you get your building setbacks, how far away you have to be from property lines, your maximum and even minimum building heights.
So maybe none of this is news to other people, but I really thought it only went as far as build a hospital here, don't build a factory over there, and that made sense to me. I guess the other rules make sense to me too. I'm resentful of rules by default, but Elena mentioned, for instance, impermeable surfaces, which is a big deal if you don't want to flood a lot. Like Houston, Texas is basically a giant concrete bowl because they didn't regulate that sort of thing in the past. What's the minimum height?
Right? So in a lot of the city, like the residential, zones, you don't have a minimum. But here downtown, where we've got bigger buildings, you can't. And in some, there's actually sub-districts of the downtown as well. In certain places, you can't build a new building less than 2 or 3 stories tall.
Just because it's not an efficient use of land?
That's part of it. Yeah, and it's not going to look good if you have a 1-story building next to a 5-story building.
That's true too. See, when I like draw little cityscapes, you know, in like the background of cartoons, I'm always drawing like a short building, really tall building. Now I see that that's unrealistic.
Well, kind of. I mean, it still happens. You know, zoning has only really been around for less than 100 years in most places. Dover's only had zoning since 1949. So anything that was built before that, it was pretty much just organic.
This is an aside, but you know what else hasn't been around for that long? Zip codes. The post office only started using zip codes in 1963. Before then, you could just take an envelope and write, like, my buddy Brian's house, and throw it out your front door, and then a guy in a crisp uniform would come along and pick it up and get it where it needed to go. For a nickel.
How has doing this kind of thing, I mean, you've been sort of in it since you were a kid, but like, how has it changed the way you think about buildings, spaces?
Yeah.
Can you turn it off? Or when you drive through a city, are you like, what is that bank doing there?
Mm-hmm.
That sidewalk is not in an optimal place for pedestrian traffic.
Right. Professional deformation.
What's that?
I guess that's the term for that. It's like when whatever you do for work, when you're out in the world, like you see it all the time and you think about it all the time. Yeah, like when a sidewalk wouldn't be passable for somebody in a wheelchair, you know, something like that. Or I pay attention to traffic patterns more. You know, I know now how things are designed and why.
Don't you hate it when people wave you out at an intersection?
Yes, and you don't have the right of way?
Yes.
Right. It's like, no, just follow the rules.
Everybody
follow the rules.
I have to watch myself now because I say the most horrible, vulgar things to people when they try to do that to me. Mm-hmm. And I have a son in the car who is starting to parrot the formation of sounds.
Yep.
If you say a phrase, he will say back nonsense that sounds like it. And it's like, oh, it's getting very real.
Uh-huh.
So, okay, I know that an extended conversation about zoning was maybe not where you saw this podcast going ever, but it's happening for a reason. When I asked Elena what Dover was doing right...
What, in your opinion, is Dover doing right?
She mentioned the adoption some decades ago of a form-based zoning code in the downtown.
And this totally ties into our zoning regulations and everything.
That means basically all the buildings have to be matchy-matchy. Similar heights, similar distance from the sidewalk. And this is not just for fussy aesthetic reasons. It's actually to enforce Dover's urbanity.
You know, all these buildings that were built in 18-something, they're right up on the edge of the sidewalk. There's no yard space. They're taller. They cover a lot of their lot because people didn't have cars then.
If you plan for everyone having a car, nobody walking to anything, you end up with a suburban Chili's and like a lot of banks. If you build everything really close together in walkable strips, you get a hip little downtown neighborhood.
Shops and people and activity, not parking lots.
And in a place like Dover, you can accomplish this goal by mimicking buildings constructed 150 years ago. How charmingly counterintuitive is that? Eat your heart out, Freakonomics guys.
Dover wants to be urban. And we're trying to get away from the old style of planning that happened for, you know, several decades, where you're planning for people to be driving everywhere, driving from spot to spot, always having ample parking. We're really encouraging filling stuff in downtown, going up. We don't have any maximums on the density of like apartments you can put in.
And if you build a space where owning a car is not strictly necessary, you can attract young people who, if we get back to the conversation we had earlier about the crushing existential weight of student loans.
And there's definitely a trend among younger people to not want to have cars, or maybe not even be able to afford them, in addition to student loans and stuff.
Becoming an adult in the full-fledged house and family white picket whatever way requires such a crazy buy-in when you think about it. When Christy and I bought a house, there were really two factors. First of all, rats were chewing through the ceiling of our apartment building, but second of all, Christy's boss's husband had recently sold us his car for cheap. Having a second car unlocked a level of mobility we didn't have before, and we started to conceive of living somewhere further from our jobs.
But without 2 cars, it would have been impossible, and we'd still be back in that old apartment. Me, Christy, Arlo, Shosh, and I guess the rats.
I mean, a lot of what makes Dover appealing is just kind of luck, our location and proximity to Portland or Boston or the ocean or the mountains. But we definitely, because we have a good bus system, and we have the Amtrak train running right through town, that I think is a draw for a significant portion of people. There are definitely people who live in downtown Dover and don't have a car, or people who live in downtown Dover and take the train to Boston for work.
Okay, so geographic and mass transit advantages, that's a big deal, and not all of New Hampshire can replicate it. But some areas can. Some areas have this stuff too, and yet all my friends are moving here and not there. Is it possible that's because of zoning? Well, how does zoning happen? I want to go back to a phrase that Elena used. Dover wants to be urban. How could a city want anything? It doesn't have a brain. It doesn't have a soul. It's not the 5th character in Sex and the City. Or is it?
I don't know what a master plan is outside of the context of, like, supervillains.
Okay.
Like,
I don't know what it is in the context of supervillains, but...
Dover has a master plan.
Yes.
Right? And so, that something like saying a city has a master plan sounds to me like it complicates things, but apparently it's the opposite.
Right, it's not. Well, most communities do have a master plan, or in other places it might be called a comprehensive plan. So that's basically a document that forms the guiding vision for what you want the community to be. And it comprises a lot of different topics. Most communities rewrite it every 10 years or so.
Okay.
We do it a little differently in that we do it on a rolling basis and rewrite a chapter every year or two. But that's
chapters in a master plan.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Elena told me that a master plan is basically a document that informs the city's regulations, like the zoning. If one of Dover's values is to be urban and walkable, the master plan articulates that value, and a form-based zoning code helps support it. If another thing the city wants is to be hip and cultured, maybe that guides them to hire a guy with really cool tattoo sleeves to book bands to play in the park during the summer.
Cool.
Yeah. It's basically like a huge book. I mean, ours ends up being this big. And it's very much, it's a product of the planning board, but it's very much intended to be a process by which you collect a lot of data, demographic data, stuff like that, all kinds of stuff. But you also really need to take input from the community. So it's really supposed to be reflective of what everybody wants.
So, what does everybody want? Like, what's the jacket copy on this?
Right, so it's like, you want to be a vibrant, great place to live and, preserve your natural resources, but have a thriving commercial downtown, and, just like everything nice about a town.
You have to assume that the master plan in Marlborough is something like, we want to be a quiet place with a crumbling abandoned school where our property investments can wither in peace, free of the burden of new life, families, culture, happiness.
Yeah. When you're talking about the idea of, like, planning a city, when you start to talk about, like, this kind of community stuff, it's funny because I feel like you always reach a level where you realize that a lot of it is, like, collective will. And that's not something that you can necessarily steer. Actually, I read an article about, you're talking about movies. They're talking about the way that, because movies are not really created by, like, one auteur. People like to pretend. It's actually like 100 people.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening, you end up with these movies that, like, eerily predict the future, basically.
The article I'm talking about is called Why Cultural Criticism Matters from Vox. It was written by Todd Vanderwerf. It's mostly about how The Hateful Eight didn't make much of an impact at the time, but seems eerily prescient regarding our spite-fueled current political moment. He writes, The Hateful Eight is just mean, and it feels like the work of someone who looked around at America and concluded that it was a land full of angry, spiteful people who would be more willing to burn their own lives to the ground than admit either their own sins or the sins of their country. Which, yeah. So in 2015, Quentin Tarantino saw where we'd be in 2019. But there's this theory about movies, posited by a guy named Siegfried Krakauer, which is that they reflect a culture's buried hopes. Because, although there is a nominal person in charge of the whole production, movies are a collective effort. Sometimes, literal hundreds of people work to create a movie together. So the more people involved in a movie, the more likely this is to happen, the more likely the movie will reflect mass desires. You can see this as a positive, accidental, spiritual, collective consciousness kind of thing, or you can see it more cynically, like a method that movies have evolved to keep individual radical ideas out, maintain cinema as a societal mirror instead of an engine. I think you could also see it as both life and death by committee, but it suggests that any project undertaken by lots of people ends up reflecting goals or values that maybe none of the individuals even realize.
Part of what makes Dover desirable to people is the type of people that live here. Like, you want to live somewhere where you're among, if not peers, then at least just people you want to be around. So I think we have a little bit of a reputation for being kind of more artsy. You already know there are young people here, and there's a college nearby, and there's a cool coffee shop, and there's a bunch of bars and whatever.
I've never been to Adele's before right there, but that place looks almost too cool. I was like...
It is a little bit too cool.
The people
sometimes.
out front, I was like, I think I could probably... I haven't been allowed in there for the last 5 years and didn't even know it.
No, they're super sweet though. So yeah, basically what I'm getting at is that collective spirit is what makes a place,
So, while it's hard to really understand how a couple of vague sentences in an interminable binder makes a city into a more attractive and livable place, maybe it's helpful to think of it instead as a way to record a portion of that public spirit, which may actually be a kind of super consciousness if we're on board with the admittedly kind of extra Siegfried Krakauer business. Think about the people involved. A planning board takes input from community members. Not all of them, but the ones who feel very strongly one way or another. These are our parents, business owners, neighbors who are zealously protective of their property values, random do-gooders, random dickheads. Some people from this group might even try to join the planning board. They always try to have one of each. Other various bits of data and whim go in there too, and a document is created and then referenced and revised as meanwhile, other stuff is happening. People are moving in, moving out, opening businesses, closing businesses, being born, dying, going to restaurants and shops they like. The process of building a city is thousands of different little processes, guided and unguided, planned and accidental. And a master plan, I guess, could be seen as a way of either recording or contributing to that process, or maybe a little bit of both. I don't know if this will help Peter Francese or not.
There has to be a part of you that is hopeful that we can do something, because here you are getting back on the horse, making another documentary.
I've done a lot of projects in my lifetime, including the first one that we did, and I've started several companies, among them American Demographics, and so forth. And every time I've started a project, I've gone into the project with immense enthusiasm, and I put my whole heart and soul into it. I convince people to finance it, and most of the time it's been very successful. This is the first project I've ever done, the sequel project, that I am extremely ambivalent about, because I simply don't know whether or not we're going to change anybody's mind. Societal change is very, very difficult. And many years ago, I read a book, which is still an important book, it's in my library, written by Jared Diamond. You may know that name. He wrote Guns, Germs, and Steel. He wrote a book that didn't get much play called Collapse. One word, collapse. And it was about how societies collapse and everybody in that society either starves to death or moves away or does something. And he talked about what causes the collapse. And there are various causes in different places of societies collapsing. But then he had a student ask him the key question: how is it that people who live in a place that's collapsing don't act to reverse the forces that are causing its collapse? And he thought about it, he did some more research. He came up with the conclusion that the majority of the people who are in charge, that is, they're in charge of the governments, they're in charge of the economy of the place that is collapsing, they themselves are insulated from that collapse. They either have enough money or they have other places where they can go to, but they do not personally feel the effects of the collapsing society around them. And so the reason I mentioned that book and his conclusion is because I ran into several people, one in particular I remember vividly, that came up to me afterwards, and I talked about the consequences of this and what happens if none of this changes and more young people leave and more elderly people move here. And he said, how long do I have before my property is no longer worth very much? And I said, no, I don't know. I'm guessing, just guessing, 5 years. He said, terrific. I'm out of here in 4. And so that's why I'm pretty ambivalent. But many people have come up to me and said, I appreciate what you're doing, and you may not see change in your lifetime, but it'll come.
Today's episode of The Last Podcast featured Peter Francese and Elena Piekut, and really the whole thing was brought about through my involvement with a program called Leadership Seacoast, which I'll tell you more about soon. In the meantime, special thanks to Lori-Waltz, Gagnon, and everybody over there. I hope that my whole notion of systemic understanding makes some sense to you, so that even if you're nowhere near us, learning about what we're dealing with will maybe help you get an easier grip on the issues affecting your community. Or just the issues affecting you. Maybe the selfish baby boomer voter was in your mind all along. That said, I also hope you found the specific case of New Hampshire interesting enough, because we're kind of going to talk about it again in a different way next time. Thanks for listening. Have a good week.